the more I learn, the less I know. And that's the tragedy of doing what I do. And I don't do it because I want to do it. I do it because I have to do it. Okay, my name is Pierre Odier. And now I'm a very proud 77-year-old. I am retired as a school teacher. And I am now just traveling, trying to document vanishing minorities before.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. In this day and age, the first thing I have to do is ask everybody to silence their cell phones. We're in that era. Not one of Pierre's favorite things. It took a lot of constant pressuring from his family and friends of his, including me, who would yell at him, "You need a cell phone," and he always resisted. My name is Alan Feldstein. I'm number 1094, member of the club, and I'm honored to be here. It is always sad when a friend and a colleague and a fellow member of the Adventurers Club goes on the great adventure. But today is not a day of sadness. Today is a day of celebration, a celebration of a life well lived. We are here to celebrate Pierre Odier. He led an extraordinary life. He was an extraordinary man, an extraordinary adventurer who I'm proud to have called friend, fellow traveler, and fellow member of the Adventurers Club. And when I, and I'm sure most other members of the club, compare themselves to Pierre, I think we have to wonder if we're deserving of membership. For Pierre defined adventure. He defined what it meant to go off the beaten path. And that path took him all over the world, including China, Africa, French Guiana, Mongolia, Russia, just to name a few. Personally, I am very grateful that I got the privilege of traveling with Pierre. In a short 2-week trip that we did to West Africa to observe voodoo culture and ceremonies, I learned so much from Pierre about what it meant to be an adventurer, what it meant to go off the beaten path. I watched how he interacted with people, how he could draw people into him. I watched how his skill as a teacher worked out there. He could connect with children. In fact, I remember a child coming up to him and just sat next to him and held his hand because Pierre drew that warmth from everybody. And I saw how he could be, in the most charming and friendly manner, bargaining with someone to purchase some artifact that he was interested in. Pierre would leave with the artifact. The seller would leave with his money, and both would walk away happy and smiling. It is a skill few can master, and I learned that from him. Pierre loved this club, though he did have some words at time to time, but that was Pierre. But he demonstrated his love and devotion and selfless contribution to the club. He served as first vice president of this club, which is responsible for putting on a program every Thursday. Which is probably the most difficult job of the club. He was on the board of directors. He was the librarian of the club. And I'm very proud to say, when you walk out, if you look above the door of the library, it is now called the Pierre Odier Reading Room in his honor. He was the archivist, and as well as serving as president of the Adventurers Club. So yes, Pierre was a friend and an inspiration to so many. And while he is now on the great adventure of all, I know that none of us in this room will ever forget him. And so I'm honored today to help sort of guide along our celebration of Pierre's life today. And we're going to start first with the video that you first saw, and then we're going to have some of the people who knew Pierre best speak about him. So let's run the video, please.
The more I learn, the less I know. That's the tragedy of doing what I do. And I don't do it because I want to do it. I do it because I have to do it. Okay, my name is Pierre Odier. And now I'm a very proud 77-year-old. I am retired as a school teacher. And I am now just traveling, trying to document vanishing minorities before they are extinct. My passion started as a school child investigating the Roman ruins, Pompeii and so on, and then it segued into Egypt, and ever after that I was bitten. And it was just a progression of curiosity trying to be satisfied, which never gets satisfied because there's always more. I ended up in 162 countries. But I want to be clear, numerically, I do not pursue any of that. Some countries I've been there, like in China, like 12 times, and Bhutan, I've been 5 times, Cambodia 12 times, so it's where my passion goes. It's not a numerical thing. What you're looking at here is the structure of my expeditions and travels. So for instance, when I go somewhere, before I go, I will take a book, which is a $4 book, and then I convert it into my journal. The pages are cut, so that's all preparation. So that has to do with inventory, travel, directory, so on. Then when you turn here, then this is the first day where I arrive. I have my thing, and then everything that occurs during that particular visit, everything that I encounter goes into this book. I'm just curious about everything. And the philosophy is nobody's going to do it for you. So if you want it and it's in your mind, get off and do it. And so at 17, I decided someone was talking about Egypt and they were talking about the pyramids, and they couldn't talk about it because I had to go see it. So I did. My parents weren't with it, and my father says, you can't go. And then my mother says, but you did say if he has the money, he can go. So I went. I don't do something for a while, I get cabin fever. I get to the point where I'm going, why am I sitting here? What these lights and all that? So I have to go. And now it's just, I'm driven by something I do not know how to explain. I think the biggest frustration for me, with you guys and everybody, is to share it. You come back so full of stuff, and there's nobody to share it. And most people don't know what you're talking about. They look at this, say, what is this piece of wood here? Well, this is the head of a canoe of the crocodile headhunters of Papua New Guinea. And everything here has a story that's connected to, I want to say, an exchange or a gift. That is, it's from the border from Laos and Burma. And this is from the upper Borneo region. It's a monkey skull that is carved, that is made as a fetish and a symbol. And it's the same way they would carve a human skull, but I could not bring a human skull back to America. When I crossed Siberia on foot, and I went to all the gulags, which don't exist according to the Russians, and this is all the stuff that I picked up. Looking back, I'm amazed that I got through customs with all that. But that's all in my backpack, in my camera bags. I left Mongolia, crossed all of Siberia, and crossed the Bering Strait in a sealskin boat with the Eskimos to come back to America. 3.5 months. I do try to be very careful with understanding the law of the country. And in terms of the route, I do plan and then I don't. Meaning I want to be totally open. I do meet the deadline of I have to leave the country, I arrive at a certain date, and I have to leave at a certain date. When I was in Papua New Guinea, and I was in this village, this is on the Sepik River, way up there. I was with a guy who was guiding me the day before, or 3 days before, and I asked for him the next day, I said, where's John, let's say? So he's dead. I said, why? Well, he was messing around with something, so we killed him. And they moved over and they showed me his body there in this little hole with a plastic tarp on it. So I quickly realized that life is just like that. And if I'd been killed, nobody in the world would know. I'm not an adventurer that wants to take risk to say I climbed the highest mountain, I jumped off the hill. I'm an adventurer because I will go into some uncharted territory with very little information and just flow with it. I feel very comfortable that you can leave me here for an entire week and I speak to nobody and my mind is just going, and even at night I can't even go to sleep and I have to get up because I'm doing something, looking at something or following something. And all of a sudden you realize that there's never a time to be you. It's just you're it, and that's it. And the way I live, you could break both my legs and I would have projects to do in this house forever. All of this has affected me in my entire life, all of these decisions and that, but I cannot resist being who I am. I can't resist.
Well, no one could say it better than that. But I think what we'd like to do now is start bringing people up to talk about Pierre. And I will tell you that when I used to have lunch with Pierre and talk about trips and stuff, it always came back to family, though. He always talked about his family. And so for our first speaker today, I'd like to invite his daughter Yvette up to say a few words about Pierre.
Bear with me, I'm very emotional. I am so proud to see people who have come to see and say goodbye to him and remember him. We have a student who flew all the way in for Guam just to be here. We have family that has been together for the first time in many, many years, which I'm very pleased and it just tickled pink, so this makes Dad's day. I wanted to give you a little history about my father growing up. He had a father from Switzerland, and his father, Leon, was an aristocrat, a little snobby aristocrat. So he would be the concierge to all the Olympic ice skaters, the concierge to the skiers. What he did to earn money, he really didn't do anything. He was a great artist, as we just found out today. I had no idea he was a painter. I found a painting and it was his. My dad's mother, actually, for many years, I always thought was from Europe. She's actually from Gilroy, California. She created greeting cards to earn money to go over to Europe in a cruise ship. And she married the first wealthiest man she could find, thus my dad's father. She went through 5 other husbands, or 4 other husbands, I think total 5. She died at a very young age. Dad moved back to the United States, and he joined the Army. And when he found out his mother passed away, he decided that he was going to move to Tacoma, Washington. He was going to go to university. He got 2 degrees, one in archaeology, one in education, so we think. We can't find the papers. But he managed to become a teacher anyways. He had the opportunity when I was 1 year old to become a teacher in California. We had our choice of Lompoc or Glendale. Well, it's funny, I live 18 minutes away from Lompoc now, and I'm sure glad he picked Glendale because Lompoc is not a great place to live. So he was a teacher for 30 years. I always said my dad was a great storyteller. As a child, I would listen forever telling his childhood stories or his trips and adventures. That would be hours and hours of sitting on his lap and having a discussion of why the sky is blue and not white. He always could convince you of anything. So when I was little, we built this addition to the house, and he wanted to call it the library. In the library, he would store all of his books and all his travels and his Albert Schweitzer signed books, anything that was important to him. Well, getting permits to have a library was not allowed because it was considered a fire hazard, so he called it a tower, the tower. So it's a European tower octagon. It was so big of an honor to finally have a library named after him because he always wanted a library. So thank you so much, Adventures Club, for that. We really, truly, he was so tickled pink. So one day as a little girl, I was 5 to 6 years old, I was sitting in the library, and we started taking book out by book to go look at the books. The first one was evolution. Well, I went to a private Lutheran school and starting from kindergarten, so I couldn't understand why I was in a religious school when my dad believed in evolution. That's when the discussions became bigger and bigger and bigger. So as 5, 6 year old, and you're having a conversation about evolution, boy, that's an important conversation. We moved on to Egypt. So at that time, I was 5, 6. I was sitting there and I said, Daddy, I want to go see the mummies in the pyramids. He says, Yvette, I promise you I will do that. And the way we facilitated that was anywhere on Hoover or anywhere we were in public and somebody had dropped some change on the ground, he'd pick it up and we'd throw it in a jar. And by God, by when I was 12 years old, we got to go. He took me to Egypt, a third world country, at 12 years old. Would I go back? I'm not sure. But it was quite the adventure. We ended up going to some of the museums, and my dad and I had a lot of little funny inside jokes. You know, we would go to the Museum of Cairo, and the guide would show us all these beautiful statues. So every statue, he would talk about the toes and the toenails. That was all he wanted to say. Look at the toe, look at the toenails, look at the detail on that. So any other museum possibly in life that I went to with Dad, we had to find the statues just to make the joke. Look at the toes, look at the toenails. We had such quite an incredible adventure, and I don't think any 12-year-old could say that their parents had taken, or their father had taken them all across the country and facilitated a dream of a 5 to 6-year-old. So I am very grateful for that adventure. It also was fitting for me is that was his first adventure, so I got to have that as my first adventure as well. And we'd been to Europe several times, but that wasn't the same thing. This was a planned trip just for the two of us. One day while we were in Egypt, my dad had warned me, Yvette, he says, just make sure whatever you do, drink anything out of bottles or cans. And I said, okay. I go, why? Well, you'll get really sick. So we were in the Luxor Hotel, and we were having some lunch, and there was this big red pitcher of punch sitting on the table. And it looked really pretty and looked really inviting. And so I said, I'll have a Coke, because I knew I didn't want to get sick. And Dad looked at me and he goes, I'll have the punch. Yes, he got very sick because the water there is not good. So it's always do as I say, but not as I do. It was fun. My last adventure with my dad was quite interesting because it was via the technology of a cell phone. I was so grateful to my sister to finally convince him to use the cell phone. It was just necessary. It was a necessity. So I had to go to Illinois and pick up my mother and drive her across country and move her to my house. She has dementia, so it's like there's no help with navigation. There's just Google Maps, and that's how I got home. I had no idea how to get from one point A to point B. And Dad would call me every day, and he'd be having lunch with Rick, and he'd be, Yvette, are you sure you don't want me to fly out there and I'll meet you and I'll help you drive? I'm like, no, Dad. I said, I'm your daughter. And he goes, what does that mean? I said, you taught me how to do this and not be afraid. I was never afraid of that trip. I had my sister saying, oh my God, the Rockies are so scary. Oh, please, just be careful, be careful. Everybody was so worried about me driving across America. Well, I ended up doing it 2 more times, and it was, I think, the best example of what my dad had taught me is never be afraid to travel, never be afraid to try anything or do anything or go anywhere. I have students that come out from everywhere in the world, especially Guam, thank you very much, who have been influenced by his dedication to adventure and travel and being just inquisitive about, well, I want to go see that, figure it out. So without technology, I mean, I wish he would have learned the technology, but he was with me that whole ride. I felt safe. I had my dad there. I didn't need him to drive me. He'd just be like, what did you see? And I said, well, according to my mom, we saw a lot of cows. I got to see the Rockies and the beautiful things, and I was looking for the white billy goats as I'm driving the white and go, well, where are the goats? But anyways, so that was a great thing. So the presentation you're seeing on the back, for 20 years, my father photo documented his, life and gave us calendars for Christmas that he'd give. Every year a different one. So most of these photographs are from these calendars, and it was fitting because he photojournaled himself, and it's a gift that Deborah and I just are so grateful for to have, to remember him and everything he's done. There is not a single person I've ever met in this entire life that has done and seen more than him. He's lived life so hard and so valiantly. I wish to be an example, or trying to at least take a little bit of that and do things with more adventure, live life to the fullest, because I'm never going to catch up to that man. Anyways, I thank you so much for all coming, and I appreciate your time. I'm so happy that he could be remembered one last time. Thank you.
Thank you, Yvette. That was great. Our next speaker is a neighbor and close friend of his, and a friend of mine as well, member of this club and the Explorers Club, Steve Elkins.
Well, I think everybody now knows a lot about Pierre. I even learned some things I didn't know about him. I didn't know him that long. I think I met him about 8 years ago, and he's responsible for me being a member of this club. And in the past few years, we became very, very close because we live close by. We would go out to lunch one, 2, 3 times a week, sometimes for dinner. And we'd have discussing everything from politics, the state of the universe, adventure travel, you name it. And we just loved doing that. It was great. And Pierre, as you know, though most of you know him and have seen all this stuff, he lived 100 lives in one life. I never met anybody who did so many different things in one lifetime. So as sad as I am that he passed away, he and I would talk about this. He was very fortunate to have had such a rich life and have done so many things and affected so many people in mostly positive ways. I mean, he did some things that today, when he was a teacher, he took kids to Africa, so on and so forth. The lawyers in this room will tell you, never could you do that now. You'd have to have enough disclosures and consent statements and stuff, and insurance would never do it. But he was not afraid. So I would say, last fall, Pierre gave, I would say it was his farewell speech. He and I talked about it, and it was really great that he was able to do it. A lot of people came, some of you were here. And he knew that this was probably his swan song. We discussed it. You know, he was a realist. And he said at the end, which I believe something we should all remember, and I know I do, is he would say to people who would come and say, how do you do these things? How do you go here? How do you do it? And he'd say, well, if you have a dream, don't worry about too much about the details. Just go for it. Just do it and go step by step. I mean, I'll always remember him saying, just do it step by step. It'll come. If you want to do it, it'll work out. And I think that's how Pierre worked. It worked out his whole life. He didn't always necessarily know exactly how he was going to get from point A to point B, but he would just put himself out there and do it and figure it out. He was a smart guy. So I think that's really how I remember Pierre. Also, many people don't realize he was a great artist. His home was full of great artworks that he made himself. I was amazed at how many things he did. Some of you have been in his house, and I think it would take a lifetime to find everything he had squirreled away there. It's incredible. But he was a great artist, and to as many of his friends, he would send birthday cards or holiday greetings, of which I have a few, and to me, that's my most treasured memory of Pierre. I got one from last Christmas time, a season's greeting card that he made himself. It's great, and that's will always be the most special thing, how I'll remember him, just from that little greeting card, because that was Pierre. I miss him dearly, but this is the way life goes. We'll all be there ourselves one day. And that's it. I mean, you know the rest of the details. He was a great man, and he influenced a lot of people. I introduced him to many young adventurers and explorers who were always enthralled with his stories and could not believe everything he did, and he was very encouraging to them. So he has a great legacy, And the family's very fortunate to have had him in their lives, and all of us. That's it. Enjoy the rest of the day. One quick little funny story. Two quick ones. Pierre liked to enjoy eating and so on. And for many years, there was a little sandwich shop in Eagle Rock on Colorado Boulevard. I believe the owner, Leah, is here. The milk farm. And Pierre introduced me to the milk farm. He went there so many times. In fact, I think Leah told me today he was there 5 days a week. They put a little bronze plaque, and he had the Pierre Odier chair. When you go meet him, you had to sit by the Pierre Odier chair. Now, one other thing is, during COVID, we couldn't go there. They didn't have in-room dining. So Pierre and I started going to different restaurants, and it turns out that Pierre really liked French dip sandwiches. Wherever I go, be it Philippe's, be it the places in South Paso or in La Cañada, okay, it's great, except Pierre would always order a full glass of the juice, and he would just chug it, which I thought was kind of funny, but that was Pierre. You know, at the end of the meal, there's any juice left, goop, goop, that's it. Forget the water or the soda.
Another good friend of Pierre's, who's also a former president of the club, Rick Flores. Come on up and share your thoughts.
Yeah, hi. I got to know Pierre through the club. My good friend Steve Peterman was his good friend, you know. And when I first came here, I was really quite astounded to find a place like this in Los Angeles, and it was a place full of really remarkable people. When I joined, the conversations that we would have, or even before I joined, when I was just coming here, the conversations that we would have here were just incredibly remarkable. I mean, there was a different type of person that were members of this club and that would, you know, meet here regularly. It was what we used to call the best kept secret in Los Angeles. At least that's what my friend called it. And of course, when I first came here, the one guy that stood out the most was Pierre. I mean, my God, in a club full of remarkable people, he excuse me. He seemed to be the most remarkable. And just sitting in this audience, listening to his talks was amazing. It wasn't just that he got out and went places. It's where he went. It was, you know, he went to places like Gabon and Mongolia and Indonesia, Sulawesi, I can't even say it, Sulawesi. Yeah, I mean, places I'd never even heard of. And he'd go there because he was a fantastic adventurer and he was curious and he was unafraid. He would go to these places alone and come back eager to tell everybody in the club about this, you know, incredible life that he was living. And, you know, sitting in that audience, and listening to these stories really inspired me. I thought to myself, God, you know, up to now, I've been living a pretty damn boring life. So it's time I got up and, you know, maybe started doing some of this stuff on my own, and I did. And, you know, it was through his example of being fearless and curious and just and really, and you could tell by the talks, being personable, because when you're going to put yourself out in these places, you're trusting the guides that you've hired, and you're trusting the the people around you. And Pierre was a remarkable communicator. He knew a number of languages, 4 or 5, but you know, he had something else that I think Alan touched on, and that was that he could just, even if he didn't know what language you spoke, he could find a way to communicate with you. And you know, but anyway, my thoughts living in or being in this club, and I eventually, again, also became president. One of my thoughts early on was, you know, I got to figure out a way to travel with this guy, which took me 6 years to figure out. He, when we were both board members, he made the mistake of, after a long conversation talking about the trials and tribulations of the board, he let it slip. Hey, yeah, maybe sometime we could travel together. And oh my God, I did not let him forget that. I nagged him for the next 3 years. Well, I remember that time you said we should travel together. Oh my God. And at the time, Pierre just, he mostly traveled alone. He did do some trips with people, but mostly his adventures were alone. And he told me why. He said later on, he told me that he just, you know, he was willing to take those risks for himself, but he was not willing to have people go with him and take similar risks, because he knew what he was getting himself into when he went to these places. And he went to some dangerous places. He went to Myanmar and Gabon, and I mean, amazing stories coming back from these places. But he really didn't want anybody taking the similar risks. But anyway, after 2 or 3 years of nagging him, he finally we decided to go, and he decided to invite me into an adventure that he was going on to Cambodia. He had written a book about Cambodia, fantastic book, by the way, and he was going to go there to check on the book sales. And you know, he figured since he was going, okay, I'll get Rick off my butt, and we'll go ahead and do the trip together. And so, you know, I was excited as all get out. And I think that same year he also took Deborah, correct? No? To Cambodia? No, maybe. Okay. It was about the same time, but he planned more or less the same trip. So anyway, so we went, and during the course of that trip, something really remarkable happened, and the remarkable thing that happened was that we connected. Pierre, you know, he really did not, in a lot of ways, like traveling with people, but in some way, shape, or form, we connected. You know, the privileged young man from Switzerland and the East LA refugee. We got together and we connected because we talked. And the best part of that trip, aside from the adventure of being in a foreign place and connecting with people, the best part of that trip was just talking every night, dinner time, lunchtime, and just exchanging ideas, philosophies, opinions about art, opinions about foreign cultures. And he was a great talker. And so through the years, we started to travel more and more. We ended up taking a number of trips together. And I count myself as being a very lucky man to have been able to do that with him, because, well, you know, he was multifaceted. He was a complex guy, but he was also like extremely loyal, very intelligent, brave, you know, loved America, which a lot of people are surprised. But he joined the military when he came here because he told me he felt like if he was going to immigrate to this country, he should, have to pay for it. He should pay it back, and this is something that he did a lot of. As a school teacher, he didn't really have to do the things he did. He did them because he felt he needed to. He was a real old-style liberal in that way, and he always felt that you needed to give back to society. I mean, in those school trips that he took, what he was really doing was not teaching these kids about, the subject matter that they were in, which was, I think he was an art teacher. But it didn't matter. He wasn't there to teach them art. He was there to teach them about life. And he was there to teach them to be the one thing that he was, that I could not believe how much he was. He was the most self-reliant man I've ever met. I mean, he started his own publishing company. He formed his own foundation. The trip to Egypt, when he first went to Egypt, he told his, as he mentioned in the video, he mentioned to his mother and father that he wanted to go, and they said, well, okay, sure, you can go, never expecting that he would, because they said, as long as you raise the money for it. And he did. And as Steve Elkins mentioned, he did it step by step. Well, the thing is that being self-reliant like that, he knew he had something special. And he went out of his way when he was a school teacher to teach it to the kids. He was teaching them about life, not about art. And he did it a number of times. It wasn't just the one trip to Africa. He had other trips where he took them to Mexico and Alaska and God knows where else. And he did it his whole career. So, his spirit and his curiosity and his love of culture and art, it was just an infectious thing. And, and he loved mainly to travel, and he loved, the part of travel that he loved the most was the connections that he made. And he would use that term a lot, connections. And to him, they were always personal connections. See, he was a Luddite. That's the term for a person that doesn't like technology or that's afraid of technology. And the reason that he was afraid of, or not afraid, but did not like technology, particularly cell phones, which was mentioned, the reason he didn't like it is because he didn't really see it as a way for people to connect. Connection to him was a personal thing. You talk to me personally. You send me a handwritten note. We communicate and connect as humans. And this is what he did when he traveled. To watch him travel, to see him traveling was to see a man completely in his element, a citizen of the world, going out there, explaining to people about his world, and being completely open to theirs. I mean, one of the funny things he did in life was whatever trip he went to, he wanted to make a connection with where he was from, with the United States. And so the first thing he would do, no matter where he went, and this applied to all the trips that I took with him, the first thing he'd tell the guide, he said, okay, you need to find me a Mickey Mouse. And that's what we do. We spend, most of the first days. And sure enough, but his idea was that no matter where you are in the world, you're going to find a Mickey Mouse. And no matter where he went in the world, he found a Mickey Mouse. It was his way of connecting his culture to wherever culture he was in. This came from where I'm coming from. Now, what do you have here? And his attention to detail when he was out there looking at the things that he was looking at was astounding. You know, I'm a photographer myself, and I don't need anybody to show me shots. So I always know what I want to take a photograph of. But I did learn that from Pierre. He did pay attention to details, and the details that he could pick out would be absolutely fascinating. So he just loved to travel so much, and I think the worst thing that happened to him when he found out, that he was ill, he had cancer. The worst thing that they told him was that, it's really not a good idea for you to travel anymore. So, and the many times that I would visit him afterwards, and even when he became apparent that he was not going to be with us a long time, the only time I could really get him to smile was when we talk about the next trip. And that was his whole life, really planning the next trip, wanting to go to the next trip. There's always something else to learn, always something else to see. And in fact, the last conversation I had with him, I was trying to encourage him to eat more, which he was losing interest in. And the only thing I could think to say was, when you get better, we could start planning our next trip. And when I said that, that's when he brightened up and started saying, yeah, I think that I could be able to go here, or I think that I could be able to go there. And I said, yeah, eat some more, and we'll go ahead and start planning it. We'll do it. We'll make it happen. And well, turned out to be otherwise. He's making that last trip on his own, the way he started. But, we'll all join him on that one sooner or later. So, the thing is, that's life. I'm gonna miss. I'm gonna miss my good friend a lot. And I'm sorry I got so emotional here, but he's Godspeed, Pierre, wherever you're at. I'm sure you're having a great adventure. I'm sure you're gonna make this as good as all your other adventures.
Rick reminded me of something. Pierre did hate technology, hated cell phones, but I was very grateful that he had one, because a few weeks before he passed, I was in South Carolina and my phone rings and it's Pierre. And he had butt dialed me by mistake. And we had this incredible half-hour conversation, because as Rick says, that was the beauty of Pierre's, having these great conversations. So ironically, it was technology that allowed me to have that last conversation with Pierre, which was incredible. I was sitting in a restaurant in South Carolina, and there's Pierre calling, and I stepped out of the restaurant and let everybody finish their dinner and had that great call. We talked a lot about here people associated with Pierre and the club, but we can't forget about the fact that Pierre was an incredible educator. He inspired so many students and so many people in his teaching. phase of his life or that part of his life and stuff. I got to meet some of his former students here today, and it's really incredible how powerful a teacher is that can have an effect on people's life. So I'd like to bring up Dan Kimber to talk a little bit about that aspect of his life. Dan?
I'm walking a little gingerly in that I have a double knee replacement coming in 2 weeks, which was something that Pierre and I commiserated about a number of times after we both retired, about how we used to be able to do this and do that, and now we can't do it anymore. But I taught with him for 30 years. I had ultimate respect for this man. The kids loved him, and that was one thing that we had in common, that we had a desire to make a difference in this world, and I know that he really did. We had some things in common. Other than that, he's a connoisseur of chocolate, which I am too. And lately I just heard about something that was left behind in his house that, had I only known that this was happening, I would have loved to have been included in this, but apparently he had stashes of chocolate everywhere in the house, which I've been known to do that in my house as well. So those cookies, by the way, that were advertised as his favorite, I can one taste of that cookie, and I thought, God, that's Pierre, loaded with chocolate. He and I were also, we used to make fun of how each one of us dressed. This picture that I just saw of him in a tuxedo just blew my mind. Wow.
Not with my wedding. What an only time.
I was always, my style of dressing as a teacher was described as casual. The word for him was rumpled, I think. When I first met Pierre, he was a union president, and he was up there rabble-rousing and saying stuff about the board and the intractable disputes that we were having. And he had this giant afro, and I thought, this guy's crazy, but I can't wait to meet him. I also ended up being Pierre's editor, which was a incredible opportunity for me to get to know him better. When he would leave each summer, teachers are from September to June, and then the 3 months of summer, Pierre would be off somewhere. And he would come back sometimes in a condition that reflected on the deprivation that he had been through for the last 3 months. He described as he was walking across Siberia. Try telling that to somebody, that you have a friend who walked across Siberia. And they'll say, oh, you got to be exaggerating. Nobody walks across Siberia. And I said, yeah, and he did it right after he walked across Mongolia. So I was his editor, and the worst speller in the world, absolutely the worst handwriting in the world. The phrase chicken scratching was invented for Pierre. And he had an abiding interest in things. Let's see, was it Rick? Yeah, you hit that on the head when you said that he was absorbed in every little detail of anything that he encountered. And I would be reading, his script that he wanted me to work on, and every once in a while I'd come across a page, and I would call him up and say, Pierre, this is not going to work. Do you want this book to be for a wide audience, or are you going to be addressing this to very specific interests that people may have? And the subject was a doorknob that he found in Mongolia, and he spent 2 pages of this book, this prospective book, describing it. I said, Pierre, there is no way that people are going to want to read 2 pages about a doorknob. I am fascinated that you are that fascinated, and I respect you for the fact that when you come across things in your travels, it's not like most people, like people that wander around in this room and the other rooms there, would just go, "Oh, that's interesting," and then just walk on. He will need to stop and to examine it at such great detail. One of the times he came back in September from one of his travels, and he described when he was in Siberia, one particular week where he and the people that he was traveling with, were completely surrounded by mosquitoes, that the air was thick with mosquitoes. And they, had fairly voracious appetite for Pierre and his buddies there. And when he came back and he talked about this, and there was some evidence that something had attacked him in the last 3 months, he talked about it like it was an adventure, and I was just fascinated with that. That would have been just pure torture for me. But this man was absorbed, as I said, with everything that he did on when he was traveling in places. He had the worst car of anyone I've ever known. It was an old Toyota. It had over 100,000 miles on it, and I inquired of him, was it a Datsun? Well, it was a dead Datsun by the end of its term. I said, "Pierre, do you ever change the oil?" Answered, "No." 100,000 miles, you never did it, right? Did you ever get a tune-up? Nope. And it sounded like it when it would turn the motor on, but it just kept running. It was like Pierre. No matter what, Pierre just kept going. And we had a name for it. We called it Le Toilette. Anyway, I wrote some words about Pierre, and I'd like to read them to you. As his editor, as his friend. So here goes. I've known Pierre Odier for the better part of 40 years. I write this as a good friend, as a fellow educator, and as an admirer of a man who has this is emotional, isn't it? Who has packed more living in his life than any 10 I've ever met. At an early stage in his life, a teenage boy became fixated with ancient Egypt, not just studying about it, but consumed with a desire to visit the country and convert the imaginings of a very curious mind to more concrete observations. And so at the tender age of 17, Pierre set about to see for himself a country shrouded in ancient scrolls and mysteries. After that initial foray into the unknown, this man has ventured year after year into every continent, seeking out less traveled places, studying less documented people, and has come away with a clearer picture of something we all seek, a greater understanding of the human family. He visited the Odier tribe in Mongolia, Russian tribes that were in the far portion of Siberia that were dwindling in numbers, the Tarahumara Indians in Mexico that were starving, and he, with a bunch of students, brought a giant van down to feed them and to help them, but they were disappearing as well. The Gu people, it took me a while to get the pronunciation right on this group, totally isolated, never having any contact with anything Western, and Pierre becomes one of the first people from another part of the world to actually visit them, and they accepted him. And what Rick said is also true. The man spoke 5 languages, and the question would often come up with us, Pierre, how did you speak to these people? And he just managed to communicate, because he was such a good linguist, in ways that most of us cannot imagine. And that's how he ingratiated himself, and that's how he lived with these people, and that's how he had this record to leave behind. And getting back to the dressing thing, one of the other tribes, one of the other groups of people, they were Bhutanese tribes. And Bhutan is a country that is about as isolated as any country on the face of the earth. And they invited him, the Queen of Bhutan invited Pierre to come and pay a royal visit. And before he told me about this before he was going to do it, and I said, "This is the Queen, Pierre. Do you think what are you going to wear?" Not that I'm really all that curious about that sort of thing. However, I was at his house and he went into his closet and he brought out this. I can't even describe this coat and the shirt and the pants. None of it matched. And he said, "That's it." And I said, "Do you have any idea that you're going to be banished the minute you walk into the room talking to the Queen of Bhutan?" But that was Pierre. It was my honor to work with Pierre on 2 of his books that stemmed directly from his travels. One is entitled Some Last People. And by the way, you all saw copies of that. You should read it. It's a fantastic book. It really is. And is based on 5 indigenous peoples on the edge of extinction in different corners of the globe. He lived among them and documented their struggle in a modern world, unconcerned with their disappearance. That's what he found out. That's what he came to learn about these people that he absolutely believed in the innermost part of his soul, in his spirit, in his desire for greater education and understanding among people. That it's when we lose these people, we lose something very important. Took a while for me to understand that, but working with him on this book, I really came to understand why this drove him so much to see these people, to make contact with them, and to try to bring some attention to them in a world mostly unconcerned about them as a people. The other, the work he did on Cambodia, tells a compelling story of poverty-stricken, illiterate children in Cambodia whose chance at a decent life depends largely on the awareness of an outer world, a world that is presently insulated against their deprivation. Pierre has spent long months among these children, working with government that offers little or no assistance, trying to bring an education to them. He helped to set up a school for the uneducated people in Cambodia, many of whom had lost arms and legs because of unexploded, or rather recently exploded landmines that are still out there, in the hope for a better life to people who are desperately in need. He has led the way to establish a school in a rural section of Cambodia and witnessed the pure magic of people released from the generations of illiteracy. And he, for the last 5 years, has continued with his own resources and with the help of the foundation to keep that school alive in a place that desperately needs it. There are too few people like Pierre Odier on this earth. He is first and foremost a teacher who has spent a long career leading his many students to look beyond the confines of their lives and consider a bigger world and their role in it. Working with this man and hearing year after year, as I have from his students who were inspired by his example, I am reminded of the enormous potential for good that all of us in the profession have. Very few of us answer that call as consistently and with as much dedication as has my good friend, and my life is richer knowing him and having learned from his example. There's more in this book that I wrote about him, but enough of that. I share with all of you enormous respect for Pierre, and I'm going to miss him a lot. The last thing I still remember is we have lunch together about every 2 months, and at the end of the lunch, the last time we were there, Pierre said, for dessert, I'd like some chocolate cake, and he said, "How big is the piece that you cut?" And she formed a little triangle like this, and he said, "Make it that big." That was my good friend Pierre, and I shall miss him.
Well, we started with one daughter. We're going to end with another, but after Deborah speaks, stay seated. We have one more tribute and surprise for you all as well. So I'd like to bring up Pierre's daughter, Deborah. Thank you.
I've heard everybody, so many people have reached out to me say, oh, I knew Pierre in such a special way. Well, I've got a crazy little background story for you on who I am to Pierre. The famous story my dad tells is he returned from one of these amazing trips that he takes, and instead of one little pair of girl shoes, he found 2 pairs of little girl shoes. Pierre, meet Deborah. Deborah, meet Pierre. It's a long story for another time, but from that day forward, I became Pierre's second daughter and a forever soul sister to Yvette. I'm about 11 years old. So the side note to this is Yvette was the kindest, most generous 10-year-old, 11-year-old you'll ever know. She still is the same way to me to this moment. But literally on 5 minutes' notice, she shared everything she had without any hesitation, and that included her parents. So Pierre meets me, and as you probably know, when he makes a commitment, he's just all in. Matter of fact, Yvette and he share that quality to today. Big hearts backed with 100% commitment. I remember him saying he'd be there for me, and true to his word, he became everything I ever knew to be a father figure. That means right away, he gets right to work and trying to set up life for me. And that means before the car that Kimber's talking about, he has a Rambler. So he throws us both into the Rambler, and we head on down to the Eagle Rock Plaza, where he promptly has to buy me a pair of Mickey Mouse slippers. And that now I would learn that on every great adventure, Mickey Mouse always made an appearance, and who knew that I was going to be one of his great adventures. So that's it. He takes on the challenge. He becomes a foster parent. Then he later adopts me. And you're probably thinking, that's crazy. People that choose to do that plan it out forever and sometimes never do it. And he makes that commitment after seeing a second pair of shoes on a 5-minute notice. From that day forward, he loves me, he invests in me, he believes me, and we forge the most incredible lifetime relationship where we rely on each other 100%, and we care for each other in just the most amazing way. As we journeyed through his cancer, I was so committed to saving whatever life I could with him. I mean, he had saved mine in so many ways, and it seemed like something he and I just were pros in. So we ventured together and we gave it all we had. And who really gonna bet against Pierre and Deborah? We're tough, we were strong-minded, and we set ourselves out to try to get it done. And we did a great job for a long time, and so I will always remember that time together, and I'm grateful that he allowed me in to take that journey with him through the thick and thin. And I'll always remember he was the person who truly showed up for me. And I will really miss him. So that is my Pierre Odier. So as we come to a close, and I guess we have a little, we're not closing quite yet, but as we close the celebration, I thought that you guys would enjoy these little facts that I know about him and that some of you have shared already a little bit. So he just did things that other people were unwilling to do. And he just wanted experiences that nobody was strong enough or courageous enough to take. And he just went out and got it. No one will ever accuse Pierre Odier of throwing things away. He is not the problem with landfill. My father, was an avid collector and collected everything. 200 mismatched coffee cups, no problem. 500 white t-shirts, they'll be just fine. They're not bothering anyone, he would tell me when I'd say, can we thin these out? Why would we? They're not bothering anyone. He was, just so you guys know, he collected things, the things that I can just kind of off the cuff. He was a book collector, top collector, pin collector, Mickey Mouse, stamps, coins, photographs, paintings, African art, Asian art, Mexican art, tribal art, North Pacific art, Middle East art, he collected spoons, he collected bowls and toy tops, textiles, movie reels, prison artifacts, vinyl records, rocks and gemstones, shanty gold weights, tribal art, chocolate molds, and clothing. I don't think I got it all. Actually, we do have it all. He was ahead of his time as an interior designer. I never knew. I would tell him constantly, Dad, that is not a coffee table. That is a camel cart. And that's what he had as coffee. And then, as a real estate agent, I went to a very fancy house and saw this beautiful camel cart as a coffee table. I went back to him and said, I stand corrected. That's a really cool table. That's a really cool coffee table. This is an important part of him. When he was in, he was all in. When he was out, better pack it up because he was out. He showed many of us, he showed most of us that you really can live without a cell phone. And he wouldn't admit it, but he did enjoy the phone ringing in the background and him getting up out of his chair and going to the kitchen and getting on the little twirly phone and picking it up and then having it be a robocall and him slamming the phone down and walking back and cursing for the next 30 seconds of wire robocalls, but he actually just preferred that. He was a one-of-a-kind traveler, writer, collector, artist, photographer, and humanitarian. He had a particular way that he liked things to be done. I don't know if you knew that. This concept, this ancient technique, was commonly known as his way. And he was passionate about everything, and everything had a specific way of being done. But not to worry, if you didn't do it that way, he would let you know. Technology was not his jam. He refused, to let devices take over for human communication. He was happy to walk down to the bank to deposit the check, He was happy to stay on the phone for an hour, you know, with AT&T. If he wanted to go mail something, he walked it down to the post office and got in line. He really just preferred the human contact. He did pass away with an Apple i13 phone, so he has that. And I think secretly he did, at the end, enjoy having the phone. Thank you to all of his favorite food places. He wouldn't have lived nearly the life without Milk Farm, Cindy's, Little Beast, the French Bistro, the Thai Cafe. They took really good care of him in the last few years of his life. There was no more of a favorite place to him than his house. He loved every single item in his house. He loved every story that accompanied those items. There'll never be a home like the home of Pierre Odier. He changed people's lives, and he cared deeply about children, and he spent his whole life trying to make a difference. He didn't just talk about it, he did it. And of all the many condolences that I've received in emails and texts was people saying, he changed my life. I can't thank enough the people who helped him at the end of his life. I can't thank Nancy enough. She was loyal, loving, and hardworking as his caregiver. He adored you, and I am absolutely certain that you made a huge difference in the life that he lived out in the last part of his life. Thank you. Thank you to everyone who showed up today and to honor my dad, and hopefully the time and the memories we have of Pierre, the teacher, the traveler, the explorer, the friend, the father, will live in our hearts forever. All the books that we've put out, we hope you'll take them, enjoy them, have a piece of them in your home, have a piece of Pierre with you forever, and I hope you remember his spirit. Thank you.
There are a lot of fascinating people in this club. It's one of the reasons I love being a member of it. A lot of people with very diverse backgrounds, talents, experiences, and that sort of thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why Pierre loved this club so much. And one of the people that introduced Pierre to this club is a gentleman by the name of Andrew McGregor, who's going to come up. And if I can just share, Andrew, that during the pandemic, Andrew became well known for playing his bagpipes at sunset every day in his neighborhood. And we're going to end our celebration today with Andrew playing the pipes for Pierre. Thank you very much, and thank you all for coming. Pierre would have loved that. I absolutely know that. Thank you so much. Thank you all for coming. There's still food and cookies and chocolate, and yes, I love chocolate too, to enjoy. So come on out into our dining area and please help yourself, and thank you again for coming.